Have you ever been your own worst enemy? Seriously, think about that for a second. Because for most of us, the answer is a massive, resounding yes. It's this strangely universal human experience to have a private monologue running in our heads that more often than not actually operates against us. We're going to normalize that right now. You are absolutely not alone in experiencing this negative self-talk. Just think about a phrase like, I always mess up. It's so simple, right? But it's just incredibly harsh. This is your classic automatic thought. For a lot of us, this inner critic has been our ingrained, habituated way of thinking for so long that it's basically just unquestioned background noise. We don't even realize how often we say things like this to ourselves. But today, we're pulling that voice out of the background and putting it right under the microscope. Here's our roadmap for how we'll do it. First, we'll meet your inner critic. Then we'll look at the 7 critic profiles, figure out where this voice originates, explore the voice of experience, and finally, practice some real self-compassion. Okay, part 1, meet your inner critic and that relentless internal monologue. Which brings us to part 2, the 7 specific profiles, or types, of inner critics. Now, while your inner critic actually thinks it's being helpful by keeping you safe from failure, its daily acts of self-sabotage are directly linked to anxiety, depression, stress, and some pretty severe burnout. To help combat this, psychologists Jay Early and Bonnie Weiss actually cataloged distinct profiles. Let's run through them super fast so you can see if any ring a bell. We've got the perfectionist, demanding absolute flawlessness, the taskmaster, pushing you right to the brink, the conformist, desperately trying to make you fit in, the controller, policing your every impulse, the underminer, trying to keep you small just to avoid risk, the guilt tripper, entirely stuck in your past mistakes, and finally, the destroyer, making these pervasive, heavy attacks on your basic self-worth. As we just ran through those, I bet at least 1 or 2 jumped out at you. Let's isolate a couple of these just to really get a feel for their tactics. Take this thought. You're so lazy. This perfectly illustrates how the taskmaster operates. This specific critic fears you'll be judged as a failure or seen as just mediocre, so it pushes you relentlessly, all driven by a profound fear of failing. Seeing the quote out in the open like this is super helpful because it creates psychological distance. Notice that it's not you saying it, it's the taskmaster. Contrast that with this one. What will other people think? This is classic conformist. This critic attacks your individuality. It desperately wants you to fit a very specific mold dictated by society or your culture or your family. It completely shuts down your free expression because, to the conformist, standing out feels incredibly dangerous. It's fascinating how vastly different these tactics are, yet they both end up completely holding you back. Moving on to part 3. Where does it originate? Let's dig into the roots of the inner critic. Get ready for a bit of a surprising psychological twist here. This harsh critic, it's often a deeply misguided defense mechanism firmly rooted in our early childhood conditioning. Researchers at KU Leuven developed a model that maps this out beautifully. It generally starts at the top with a family history of restriction, rejection, or neglect. That kind of environment fosters a critical self-attitude, which then cascades right down into information processing problems. That basically means we start filtering the whole world just to see our own failures. The critic then steps in as a self-protective mechanism, which ironically just leads to even more interpersonal difficulties. It's a powerful, cascading cycle. The really crucial piece of this puzzle is captured right here in the definition of the introjected parent. Basically, in difficult or neglectful childhood situations, a kid will often adopt the harsh characteristics of a critical parent. Why do they do that? Well, it's a desperate attempt to escape overwhelming anxiety and gain at least the illusion of control and safety. So your critic initially had a wildly important job, protecting a vulnerable child from pain. The catch is, it just keeps operating inside you long after it's no longer necessary. Let's pivot to part 4, the voice of experience, and finding your true healthy inner voice. So, how do we actually fix this? The best way is to contrast these 2 competing voices. On one side, we have the inner critic, and on the other, the voice of inner experiencing. Reading through these side by side is usually a massive aha moment for people, because it immediately clarifies exactly which voice is running the show in your head at any given moment. Let's break this comparison down. The inner critic speaks against you. It's a loud, harsh voice, just this repetitive droning. It has zero nuance, and it loves to generalize, using words like always, everybody, or nobody. But then look at the voice of inner experiencing. This voice speaks on your behalf. It's a quiet, calm whisper. It's friendly. It's highly specific to the actual situation at hand, and it's incredibly creative and uplifting. Once you learn to spot the harsh, sweeping generalizations of the critic, you can actually start tuning in to the specific, friendly whisper of your true self. And that brings us perfectly to part 5, practicing self-compassion, using some fantastic CBT-inspired tools. The research here is incredibly clear. Embracing self-compassion acts as a massive buffer against anxiety and depression, and it builds genuine emotional resilience. We're going to walk through 4 totally accessible steps to help build that resilience. 1. Recognize and challenge thoughts. 2. The compassionate friend approach. 3. Reframe shoulds. And 4. Embrace self-care actions. Now, I really want you to view these not as clinical chores or some kind of homework, but as empowering daily habits to completely restructure your emotional resilience. Let's zoom in on a few of these. Step 1 is all about creating distance. You've got to catch the automatic negative thought, or what's often called an ant. When you hear that loud, harsh voice, physically write the thought down. Writing it creates immediate psychological distance. Then, you actively challenge it by asking one simple question. Is this based on facts? Usually, because the critic absolutely loves to overgeneralize, the answer is a hard no. You challenge the thought, and then you replace it with something balanced. Step 3 focuses on reframing shoulds. Words like should are massive triggers for the inner critic because they instantly set up these rigid, completely unrealistic expectations. Just look at the difference here. Instead of the heavy, suffocating pressure of, I should be better, look at the reframe. It would be nice to improve, but I'm doing my best. You are drastically reducing all that unrealistic pressure while still maintaining a healthy desire for growth. It is an absolute game changer for your internal dialogue. And this brings us to one of the most powerful tools in the box, the compassionate friend approach. Think about it for a second. If a good friend came to you after making a mistake, you'd offer them support, right? Not harsh criticism. Well, this technique asks you to literally write a letter to yourself, offering that exact same level of understanding. Reading it aloud helps retrain your brain's internal dialogue to naturally adopt a supportive tone over time. You are actively choosing to foster a balanced, healthy relationship with yourself. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. What kind words will you speak to yourself today? Remember, practicing self-compassion doesn't mean you're ignoring your flaws or pretending mistakes just didn't happen. It simply means acknowledging those mistakes without crushing self-judgment. It means treating yourself with true, enduring kindness so that you can actually grow. So notice that inner voice today, challenge it when you need to, and choose to be your own greatest ally. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this, and keep practicing that self-compassion.